Okay. Okay, cool. All right, let me just send this on.
I'm going to follow you.
I was going to say the same.
Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to the UNSW Bachelor of Design Industry Insights Lecture Series. That's a mouthful, for Core Design Studio 3. For those of you who haven't met me, my name's Emma Mills and I'm the convener of the course this semester. It's fantastic to see you all logged into the digital space we're teaching in this semester. Despite the challenging circumstances last term, we were incredibly impressed and really proud of the way that you were all able to adapt and embrace change and engage new technology so quickly. And these are really important aspects of being a designer of any discipline at any point of time. So we really are proud of the way that you've done that. As you know, the focus for Design Studio 3 is industry, and this term through this lecture series we'll be hearing from design professionals from many different disciplines who will give us an insight into their practice, their process, expectations, and the range of possibilities and opportunities for you in the industry. So today we're really thrilled to welcome Stephen Todd, the Creative Director of Sydney Design Week 2020, and also Keinton Butler, who's the Senior Curator at the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences. So Stephen and Keinton are going to introduce and discuss the Sydney Design Week hybrid exhibition brief, which we were really excited was made available to the second year UNSW design students. So I'd also like to welcome Mark Ian Jones, who's the UNSW Art and Design Deputy Head of School for Design, and Mark will be joining us to lead the conversation with Stephen and Keinton. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we begin. This lecture is being recorded and the video will be available immediately after this ends, along with the transcript of the conversation. So you'll also be able to watch this lecture. As you're watching this lecture, there's the facility to turn on subtitles if that helps in any way. But we're really looking forward to also having some interaction with the students. Towards the end of the lecture, we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A. If you upload your questions into the chat, we won't be able to potentially answer all of them. They will be moderated and some of them will be published. So get in early with your questions that hopefully Stephen and Keinton and Mark and possibly myself might be able to answer for you. So I would like to hand over to Mark now to drive the discussion with Stephen and Keinton, and thanks Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Emma, and thank you. Welcome Keinton and Stephen to UNSW in a very interesting virtual space. And it's great to have the hybrid brief for Sydney Design 2020 as our student project for the term. So we've got a few questions that we'd like to ask you this morning that will hopefully help the students understand a bit more about you and the project that they're about to embark on. And the first one's around your kind of journey. We find it insightful and inspiring for the students to kind of understand the career pathways that lead people to where they ended up. So perhaps you could both take a turn in describing your journey.
Go on. Keinton first.
Well, I actually have a design practice background, so I started my career studying furniture technology at RMIT. After I graduated from school, I was really interested in design and specifically in furniture design and in industrial design. So I really, I guess, looked around for the best course to be able to facilitate that passion, and I found it at RMIT, which I found such a great experience. After that, I worked in the furniture industry for a period of time, and following that, I actually moved to the UK and essentially started working in in galleries and museums there, and worked as an independent curator as well. And around that time, I also studied a master's in curating contemporary design at the Design Museum, which was in partnership with Keinton University in London. So I found that experience really valuable, I guess, to have some exposure to designers working internationally and particularly in Europe, and felt that I was, I guess, after a decade, ready to bring all of that expertise and experience back to Australia, and started this role at the Powerhouse Museum 4 years ago. The time I spent overseas gave me a lot of opportunity to think about what I wanted to do with my career, from a, I guess, more from a sort of a social perspective, and that really, yeah, that was a really interesting time for me to sort of think about what I could contribute as a design curator in terms of giving back to the design community, playing a role in design education, I guess, and also providing a platform for designers, which I absolutely am able to do in this role at the Powerhouse Museum. Stephen?
Yeah, my journey, if you like, is far less academically endowed than Keinton's. I studied, in fact, sociology and politics, and my first jobs out of college were in social research, especially in the medical sector. And then I did a kind of a sideways segue into journalism, and that came about because I moved from Melbourne to Sydney in the late 80s, and in about 1990 I moved to Paris, where I lived for 20 years. and I established myself as a journalist in the cultural sector, writing about art, fashion, design, and architecture. And to be honest, those things I really learned on the fly. I think sometimes you realize you find, like, water, you find your own level. That was my kind of comfort zone, and by being based in France, which was a really exciting time in the 90s. It was François Mitterrand. There was an enormous amount of architectural programs going on. There was a lot of really interesting social policy going on. Of course, the art scene and fashion scene, everything was there as well. So I built up a kind of a portfolio of freelance contributor roles with British press, Australian press. I was the culture correspondent for The Australian for 14 years. I wrote for The Guardian, The New York Times, American Vogue, Fantastic Man Wallpaper, all that kind of sort of lifestyle sector, what we call the lifestyle or shelter title sector. After 20 years in Paris, in about 2005, I set up a company which was not a communications company, but a branding and marketing company. And I worked with brands for brands that created probably almost a primary product, like the Woolmark or Swarovski, the crystal company, or companies that needed someone to facilitate a relationship between their core product and industry. So a lot of my work was about kind of brokering relationships between big companies. So for instance, Swarovski would come to me and say, look, we'd really like to be involved in the interior design sector, or in the design sector, but people just want to apply our crystals to our products. How can we work in a way that they become integrated into the design? And so my job for 18 months was to negotiate and broker deals with designers like Konstantin Giercic or Doshi Levin, Nendo, to kind of work with us for a year to create products. So I sort of existed between, I segued from publishing into kind of more corporate branding. And then I moved back to Australia after 20 years away. I moved back in 2010 and have taken on the role as design editor of the Financial Review. So my role there is a very big remit. So design, as a design editor, I cover really everything from urban planning to sort of architecture to design, and right down to things like pens and tableware. So it's a broad remit across most of the supplements in that group. And mid last year, the new chief executive of the Powerhouse, Lisa Havilah, invited me to come on board as creative director of Sydney Design Week. So I have those two roles. I keep my editorial role, and then I have a role here which is working very closely with Keinton, and that's where the whole hybrid commission came from.
Great, thank you both. There's some really interesting journeys that you've been through, which kind of leads to the next question, which is around collaborative practice. So maybe Keinton, if you can talk about, as a curator, what parts of your practice are collaborative, and then Stephen, if you follow up with how your practice is collaborative.
Well, almost every part of my job is collaborative in some way, and that's within the museum, collaborating with all of the different departments and teams here, but also externally as well. So for the Hybrid Commission project, for example, we're working with 10 design studios, and in our way, we're collaborating with them as well. So internally, we really rely on, I guess, the strength of some very diverse skills and groups within the museum. So we work with a production team, we work with editorial staff, we work with our internal design team to design and construct exhibitions, for example. We work with our public programs team very closely, so we're always trying to embed talks and symposia and public programs within our exhibition projects as well. So it really does rely on the curatorial team being able to work successfully in a very collaborative way with a very diverse group. And as I said, externally, we really rely on the design industry and the design community to enable us to commission new work at the museum, to present new exhibitions and programs. So the connection that the museum has with the design industry is very important, and it's I guess a really a vital collaboration, I guess, for us to have that that connection and that dialogue with the design community in New South Wales, but also in Australia and internationally as well. So we're always trying to look at opportunities for international collaborations as well, to really reach out to the international design community. And in a way, Stephen, being involved in this Hybrid Commission and Sydney Design Week as well is another example of a successful collaboration. Stephen and I have worked quite closely on the project for the last 12 months, and that's been a really enlightening experience for us both, I think, to have Stephen almost in residence here at the museum working with us, and also liaising very closely with many of our design studios that we're working with as well. So that's been a very new dynamic, I guess, for us at the museum, but I think a really successful one, because it's enabled us to be much more porous, I guess, as an institution, to be able to work with people like Stephen and some of the design studios as well.
I was just thinking, in a sense, my practice, if you like, is kind of schizophrenic in a way, because I have two roles right now. As a journalist, it's egotistical. I work on my own. I don't even work in the office at Fairfax. I work from home, and I control everything I do. It's my opinion. I express everything. So it's kind of the inverse to this relationship, and that's why it's really interesting for me to work. I come in, I live out of town, so I come in once a week. We meet, I meet with Keinton. We speak pretty much every day. And that was interesting for me. I mean, I've worked with big organizations before, but generally as a consultant, you come in and come out. And here what's happened, I find the way to really get best benefit from this whole exercise, and we'll go into this a bit later, but how Sydney Design Week then segued into a publication as a result of the COVID epidemic. It was very clear, as an outsider, first of all, you need to really try and understand who does what and how things work, and that takes a few months. So that's that period of getting to know one another, and then I think probably as someone who works independently, there's that idea of, okay, seriously, to make this work, you need to absolutely collaborate across the concept, across the organization. And in a sense, that's kind of where the hybrid idea came from, that idea of collaboration in sort of many, many dimensions. It really wasn't about, at no point did we really feel we wanted to commission a or some designers to create a or some things that express just themselves. We really felt that, and I don't even know whether we discussed this particularly, it just seemed the way that things are, that people need to be able to have dialogue, they need to be able to sort of cross-pollinate thoughts, and that by doing that, we're going to get something that's much bigger and better, or at least intriguing in a way that's something that's developed by one person working in solitary confinement can do. So that sort of collaboration and hybridity is really part of the organization that I don't think we ever planned to put together, but it's the way we fell into place.
That's really insightful. And I mean, you're talking about being adaptable, and I mean, the whole COVID thing, no one could have predicted that. And we couldn't have predicted the way that we've had to adjust our lives and, you know, the way that we're working now. And it's interesting because designers are always seen as being these adaptable professionals. You know, they can adapt to things, they can adjust. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how both of you have adapted in a personal and professional sense to the effect of COVID on what we do?
So I guess there's been a few changes here at the museum. We have sort of a 300 strong workforce here that many of which were required to work from home for a period of time. So with an organisation where we have staff working here that have been here for, you know, 30 odd years, that was quite a big change, I guess, in their working environment. But it's been quite extraordinary, actually, in how quickly people have adapted. So something that I guess seemed, you know, just really inconceivable, I guess, a few months ago, to have certain curators or other staff working from home in an efficient way has really taken not a lot of time to arrange, actually, thanks to our great support team here that we have. So I think it's been interesting. I think, yes, I guess we couldn't have necessarily predicted the effect of COVID, but I do think it's brought a lot of sort of discussions and ideas about more sort of flexible working environments and more sort of agility in terms of our, you know, where we work and how we work and how long we work for each day, I think has been sort of really brought to the forefront. And I think it's been a really good opportunity, I guess, for us as sort of as a society to start talking about that whole future of work sort of discussion and whether or not this, you know, this sort of early 20th century sort of construct of clocking in, you know, from 9 to 5, whether or not that's even relevant or even appropriate for the current environment that we're in at the moment. So for me, I think that it could potentially bring some opportunities through this. And I think probably the fundamental change I think that will come out of this is the sort of the changes in our work habits and our, I guess, our reliance on working in the same spaces. And I think we're already seeing that in the CBD, for example, that a lot of organisations are choosing not to go back to the office, and we're seeing it from Google and Facebook and a lot of the sort of Silicon Valley startups who are saying that they're just going to, you know, ask their staff to work from home or work remotely, which I think offers so many opportunities, particularly for people in regional areas. And that I think will have a really big impact and knock-on effect into yeah, how our cities are planned as well. So there's going to be some really interesting times ahead, actually, once we come out of this. It's definitely brought that conversation forward, and one I think that we really had to have.
I think it's interesting in March when we were both down in Melbourne for Design Week at that time, and that's when it became very. I think it was the 13th of March was the opening, and no, the 12th of the Thursday was the opening at the NGV, which was a very glittering and fabulous affair, where it was a slight joke about sort of maybe not, maybe doing a bit of an elbow thing, and then by Friday the 13th, things started to kind of collapse. And one of my editors on the Financial Review said, "Oh my gosh, soon enough we'll all be working from home and eating stockpiled food." And I said, "Well, I've been doing that for 2 decades." In a sense, organizationally, it hasn't changed anything for me, but it has actually allowed other people to see that that's a viable way of working. As a journalist or as a writer, I gather my information, then I tend to go home and I work quietly in my own corner. And also, I think that COVID is one thing, but also, especially vast ways of the country were really affected by the bushfires as well. So, and then where I live, it was also in the Blue Mountains, was also flooded for 3 weeks. So it's been kind of this calamitous kind of change, or a massive disruption on many levels, of which to my mind, COVID is the latest, possibly not the last sort of outcome of that. Certainly big news organizations like Nine Media, or what was Fairfax is now Nine Media, that was problematic for all of those staff, because they have systems in place which had to kind of be, everyone had to, like here, I think everyone was given a laptop and said, go home, take it with you every day. It may be that we ask you to stay home tomorrow. That happened across the Nine Media news company. And what happened, it took about 2.5 weeks for systems to be re-put in place for things to operate. So there was a lot of kind of stress and tension for 2.5 weeks. And after that, people kind of really eased into it, and the novelty of Zoom meetings took off, and that was all fun. And then the kind of tedium of Zoom meetings kicked in, and nobody wanted to be seen anymore. I got tired of doing making sure my house was neat. That my dog wasn't doing things in the background. I mean, so it was.
That's what Zoom backgrounds are.
I know, but no. I know, but I just couldn't have Carrie Bradshaw's bedroom as a background. So yeah, I think it was a massive disruption, and I think that it really did question. It sort of advanced arguments about the way we work, and of course we're seeing that there's almost kind of like a retroaction that is it going to be a return to sort of massive cubicles, the sort of the stalwart system of mid-century modernism, where we work in cubicles and protected from everybody? I don't think that will happen, but I think it has pushed that debate along a lot. But I think that I think people have understood that you can work in different ways, and that in itself is kind of an achievement.
I think that's a very good point, because we've all had to adapt, and we're all working in places that some of us never planned to be working. And I think you really kind of highlighted what has changed to what has changed to the urban kind of condition, and the potentially positive outcomes of quite rightly, not just COVID, but the bushfires and floods and all of the calamities that have happened thus far in 2020, and we're only in June. So we might move on to the Sydney Design Week hybrid exhibition brief now, which is going to be undertaken by our second year Bachelor of Design students, which we're very excited about, and I'm sure they're all very excited about. And given that the focus of Studio 3 in our Bachelor of Design is around collaborative practice, how does that tie in with the notion of hybridity in the Sydney Design Week 2020 brief?
Do you want to go? I think how does collaborative practice tie into the hybrid commission?
Yeah,
it's intrinsic. It's absolutely intrinsic to it. And as I alluded to before, Keinton and I we didn't really plan this, but we felt that we were both thinking the same way, that we didn't want to do a Sydney Design Week which would be, here's some latest product that designers are working on, and it's just by dint of the fact that it exists, we're going to show. We really felt that as the powerhouse, and Keinton can speak more to this than I can, that the concept needed to be really embedded in the period in which we're living, and that the idea of the essential idea is that we get 10 designers or design studios. Some of them work in pairs or in other configurations, and that we would develop a brief to really focus the typologies, or sort of set up parameters of typology. And we decided on the contemporary home. It could have been work, it could have been many other things. We decided on future homes, and then we decided to really add a layer of complexity, because I was thinking very much about Robert Venturi's complexity and contradiction, and thinking that, you know, there's a time now where the perfection of the end product wasn't something we were necessarily after. We were more about the process that gets us to it, and that something that's maybe complex or even imperfect could actually be really important to consider. And almost as a speculative project, although we also did put the fact that the pieces could be considered prototypes for industrial development as well. And then the extra layer was that we would ask the designers to collaborate with, I'm not even sure we used the word collaborate, it seems to not be the word to actually pronounce at the time, but that they would kind of engage with other creatives beyond the field of design. And Mark, we had quite a lot of conversations around that idea of what kind of people that could be. We have some collaborations with UNSW and some with other institutions, but the idea was that the designers, that the powerhouse would be the enabler or the facilitator of creating something that possibly wouldn't have happened if the powerhouse hadn't have been the commissioning body. So it was important for me that the powerhouse was expressed through this by enabling these things to happen. So we challenged designers to work with people often that they didn't know already. Some did know people, but, you know, Elliot Rich, for instance, we were talking to her about a concept she had for kind of a more empathetic sort of mirror structure, or sort of a piece of a meditative device for the home, and we ended up pairing her, or offering her to speak to Joel Pearson, who teaches at UNSW as a neuroscientist and a psychologist. So the idea of pushing down the barriers and getting people out of their own comfort zone and sort of rubbing them up against somebody else's way of thinking and being in the world, that was absolutely intrinsic to the whole process.
Okay, that's
good. That was a really important part of the development of the brief for us, to this notion of hybridity. And if we talk about collaborative practice, we wanted to reflect how contemporary designers are currently working at the moment, and that is often with other practitioners or researchers that are working outside of the field of design. And so we really wanted to embrace that with this brief, and to facilitate new connections or enable collaborators to work on a project that they've been wanting to work with each other for a while. So that was a really important part of it.
Okay, that's great. And I mean, there's obviously a very strong focus in there on social and, you know, environmental considerations, climate change, you know, the future of living, and those sorts of things. What do you think the responsibility of the students that are here today listening to us, you know, our next generation designers, you know, what responsibility do you see they have to prioritise, you know, these sorts of considerations in their design practice?
I think that design is implicit in so many of the issues that we have globally, and I think that any sort of young or emerging designer, I think should be able to acknowledge that there are so many stages within the design and manufacturing process that can have substantial environmental or social impact on the planet. So I think there are so many opportunities through that design development stage to consider how to reduce the environmental or social impact of that project or object or product that they're designing. So everything from, you know, mining the minerals that come out of the ground, the use of the raw materials, transport, you know, fabrication, use of water and energy, and then all the way down to the recyclability, I guess, of the product or the end of life of the product. So there are so many opportunities that designers now have to really improve the way in which these design objects impact the planet. I think there are many opportunities there. So I think that the work that's being done currently in the materials technology space is a really great case study for that, because it's really looking at raw materials essentially, and looking at how industrial and agricultural waste, for example, or plastic waste could be reused in some way, which again will have a really big impact on the planet. And I think fashion is another industry, really interesting industry too, that has a very large environmental impact and has, there are many opportunities there to improve things. I will say as well, given that we're in Australia and we're located in the Asia Pacific region, I think that designers in our region have a huge opportunity, I think, to really affect the future of the planet. I think there's something like 60% of the world's population live in the Asia Pacific region. So if you think about that from an Australian designer's point of view, and opportunities to collaborate with other designers within that region, so in China or Asia, or China, India, there are opportunities there to actually have a really big impact. So I think that that's a really exciting prospect, I think, for young designers today, especially working in Australia in the Asia Pacific region.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think I don't have anything to add to that, except that I think that increasingly, and certainly over the last 5-6 years, we've seen the design of new product for the new product's sake has become increasingly questioned, and really at kind of the highest level. Paolo Antonelli, who's the senior curator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, last year curated a show which was about broken nature, at the same time as the Cooper Hewitt in New York had a show about nature. We're finding that the seeking out, creating new objects for new objects' sake is really not going to stand up, and a greater reflection on the sort of cultural, social, climatic, and ethical impact of production and conception is becoming increasingly important. So, as much as everyone loves a new chair, people are understanding that design goes way beyond the design of product.
Yeah, and we use a term in the Bachelor of Design, of responsible practice, that encapsulates all of those things that you've talked about as being very important. Not just making things for the sake of designing something new, but actually thinking about all the impacts that has, and in fact, do we need another chair is also important. Okay, so kind of moving more on to hybrid again. So given COVID, how will you be presenting hybrid to the public if there's no longer a physical exhibition on the cards?
Well, Stephen's probably best placed to talk about this, but
Okay.
We're looking at a publication at the moment as I guess there's an alternative platform or presentation space for the Commission. So we've been working quite hard over the last couple of months developing that in light of recent events, and obviously with Stephen and his editorial background, we're really thrilled to be working with him on the publication. We see it as I guess an opportunity for us to dive a little bit deeper into some of the sort of research that some of the designers and their collaborators have been doing for the commissions, and so it enables us to look at papers and essays, interviews, and various other various other sort of research elements that we wouldn't otherwise be able to present within an exhibition context. So in a way, it's an ideal platform for us because there's so much work and so much thinking that has gone into these commissions, particularly with some of the academic researchers, that it's a great opportunity for us to also present that alongside some images of the finished products, but also we're looking very closely at documenting this whole collaborative process as well. So we'll be including images and material that represents the collaborative nature of the commissions, the discussions, the dialogue, the sketches and drawings that happen through this process, and really heroing that in the publication as well, which is, again, something we wouldn't be able to necessarily do in an exhibition context.
Yeah, I mean, the move from 3D presentation inside the powerhouse to sort of a 2D presentation in a book, it was at first, it was a major pivot, that word of the moment, but it's by transposing some of those manifestations into kind of a printed form, you actually gain in certain ways. Of course, you lose the immediacy of an exhibition, but you do gain. And the way we looked at it was that there's the hybrid commission. The whole theme of Sydney Design Week 2020 was hybrid. So it was going to permeate everything that we did, and there were several exhibitions happening across the museum. So it's not just the hybrid exhibition that's not going ahead, or at this stage anyway. So we were able to in 2 or 3 weeks, we sort of turned that big ship around and turned it into a publication, which has a couple of kind of advantages. One is that, as Keinton alluded to, you're able to present things in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. For instance, with a prescribed operating budget, we weren't able to invite all of the speakers down to do our 2-day design summit, but we have been able to engage with them to write or to curate chapters, in which they become kind of like the chair of the panel, and the people they're interviewing and presenting become like the panelists. So it's actually allowed us to present or at least sort of make a more complex content of what would have been the design summit. And also it lives beyond our shores, and it lives for all time. So it's not an ephemeral thing that passes. It's something that can actually be distributed much more broadly. And of course, we're working very closely with the digital team in-house at the Powerhouse to develop sort of online content as well.
That sounds very exciting, and it opens another important question for the students that are here today. Will there be any opportunity for some of the student outcomes of this course to be involved in the exhibition or publication?
Yeah, I think that we're very open to that. And the thing is, what I don't know Keinton's stand on this, but I'm really keen to see what people who are the new generation, how they're thinking, because in a sense, when I started out 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the idea of collaborate, and in fact, even until quite recently, some people haven't been able to actually take on that concept of collaboration and opening up. It's not a very modernist idea. The modernists had an idea of the designer genius, or the author genius, or anything. So this idea of, and that's where I grew up. So I'm actually keen to see how students, who I'm assuming are of a certain age, i.e. young, how they take on this idea. I think there's a lot that, I'm hoping that there'll be a lot for us to learn from that. And we have space, we do have the digital platform, which is going to be quite exciting. We're working with, we've just sent out kind of a template of how we can kind of gather information, and that's something we're happy to share with you as well. But yeah, I think there is room, but even before getting to that phase, I'm really excited to see what comes out of it.
Right. So anything exciting in the pipeline for either of you? So anything at MAS or personally that the students might be interested in hearing about?
She's getting a dog. Come on, it's exciting.
It is exciting. Absolutely.
We are looking into getting a dog, which I think most people are doing at the moment. Based on what I see on TikTok, everyone is getting dogs. So that's another good thing that's come out of COVID. A lot of dogs have found happy homes.
Totally.
Coming up, we're doing some really interesting work at the museum actually around COVID. So we actually have a COVID collecting strategy in place, which will be able to publicly announce soon, but we're working very hard at the moment to document a lot of initiatives that are happening in the built environment, and particularly within design and technology and science around COVID, which is, I guess, some sort of rapid response collecting, I guess, from the museum, which is really exciting. So there'll be opportunities, hopefully, for us to disseminate that information out soon. We're also looking at an exhibition currently in development around design's role in the health and medical sectors as well. So we, as the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, we're really in a sort of a good position to be able to talk about both disciplines in that way and look at those sort of interdisciplinary crossovers. And we've been following this trend really in the last sort of 5 to 10 years of design studios who are far more embedded in the development of scientific and medical equipment to make them, I guess, more consumer focused, more usable, and rather than bringing in a designer at that sort of later stage to, you know, apply a sort of an aesthetic treatment to a piece, they're really coming in at those early stages and being quite embedded in that process of developing these devices and tools. And we're specifically looking at, I guess, the evolution of what was once very sort of large scale medical equipment that would sit within a hospital or laboratory context, becoming far more personal and portable even. So we have this incredible and very rich historical collection here that we can really show that the juxtaposition of having these very small sort of almost wearable objects that are now being designed to where we were sort of 100, 150 years ago. So that's pretty exciting. I'm also co-curating a online symposium, which I suggest everyone check out. It's called Spaced Apart. And it's in collaboration with a design studio based in Melbourne, UP. And I'm co-curating that with RMIT Design Hub and a few other curators. And that was an opportunity for us just to look at ways that we might be able to give back to the design and creative communities during this period of lockdown. So it's a 1 hour sort of talk or presentation or Q&A with a designer or an architect or photographer. A lot of them have been international actually, which has been really interesting. Every sort of couple of days we're doing one of those for the next 6 weeks. Yeah, I guess there are so many initiatives at the moment in the digital space where people are really looking to reach out to others and connect. And I think that creatives and designers are also really looking for ways to become more visible on online platforms as well. So this is a kind of an experiment, one of those experiments, I guess. And I think we'll be seeing a lot more of this type of work going forward as people, begin to see, I guess, the importance of online platforms and getting their work out there in that way if they're unable to show it, you know, within an exhibition context or in a festival context, or even having, you know, face-to-face meetings with potential clients or. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting.
I work in a fairly reactive manner as a journalist, and some, you know, for me, a 3-month plan is kind of as much as I get to. So I work by quarterly increments. So as well as the publication is of course taking up a lot of my time. So it's a very intense process. In particular because we're working with art directors, an art direction studio called Paris, who are in Paris. So that means sort of strange work hours and really quite intense philosophical conversations about post-structuralist theory late at night. So that's got a deadline of a few months from now. And otherwise, I'm working on the design issue of the Financial Review magazine, which is in August this year. So I'm doing a series of interviews with Nato Fukasawa at the moment, which is taking up a lot of time. They're all kind of quite quiet and intense things. So for me, coming in here is about getting into the organization, into the sort of the swing of things. And moving from an exhibition or moving from a design week to a publication is not as labor saving as that might suggest. It's just a different kind of labor. So it's intense. Checking in 3 months, I'll have something else.
Sounds good. Well, we're looking forward to seeing the publication. But yeah, look, I think all those challenges and changes are very very much of the moment, aren't they? So a big question for you both. You know, our students are starting their second year in their program, of a 3-year program, and we've scaffolded their learning around portfolios. And a question that they're always asking us is, you know, what do people look for in a portfolio that sets them apart from other design graduates? So is there some bit of advice you could give to the students about what makes, you know, a standout portfolio?
I guess I would have to say evidence of self-initiated research projects, because that is, for me, a clear indicator of someone who has real sort of curiosity, I guess, in terms of developing their own practice and researching areas outside of perhaps what their course curriculum asks them to. I think that some of the most successful designers that I'm seeing today have their studio work that they focus on, so their commercial work that they work with clients, but then they also have their own side projects, I guess, which are often very embedded in research. So I use Andrew Simpson, who's a local designer, as an example. He has a successful industrial design studio, but he also generates these side projects into a sort of material explorations and materials technology, and he does that just out of a real interest in that area. So he's done a lot of work with recycled ocean plastics, for example. He's quite knowledgeable about plastics now, actually. And what you find is that these research projects, although there was no client or brief for it necessarily, that work actually ends up informing his own practice in a way. So I think that's really vital now for designers to continually evolve and develop their practice, in that they really need to be looking at, I guess, a sort of an additional level of research that perhaps wasn't required previously. And that sort of ties into a lot of what we've been talking about today in terms of interdisciplinary practice and really looking outside of, you know, sort of what we would sort of consider the sort of more traditional design disciplines, but really taking yourself outside of that on occasion, either talking to others that have expertise outside of the field of design, or just doing your own research as well. And I honestly think that gives designers the edge over others, because they're able to bring something very different to a project than they would otherwise.
I think it's a really good question, and I'm thinking of it, and I guess for me, the way I see designers' works is either at portfolio in a graduate show, or it might even be as part of an early exhibition at the Butler Furniture Fair, or another design sort of meet. And I think it's a long time since I've actually, and as a design editor, it kind of is what I'm seeing. So it's incredibly personal. There's nothing at all Cartesian or logical about it. But I'm just thinking it's been a long time since I've really been swayed by something that's just beautiful. Like the aesthetics or the beauty of a thing isn't enough. And I'm just thinking while Keinton was talking, I think that it's, for me, what intrigues me are things or processes or systems which either have an incredible breadth of connectivity and lateral thinking to a whole other sort of train of thought and systems and other things, or is incredibly focused. But the aesthetic of the thing is less interesting. And I think that's something that it's the integrity of thought more than the beauty of the product.
That's really nice advice from both of you. So I'm being told that we're slowly approaching the end of our session, and I did forget to ask if you had any visuals to share, but we might come back to that after a bit of Q&A. So do we have any questions there that to our producers? I'm just looking to Emma and Sarah. Do we have any questions there that I'm just looking for those, and here we go. No, so there's a question there asking if we can see some visuals. All right, so do you want to share those visuals, Keinton?
Yeah, we have a couple of visuals for you, which we're including, I guess, just as work that we admire, I guess. I'll just bring it up now. I don't know whether you can see that at all.
Yes, that's coming up where I'm sitting.
Yeah. So Stephen might like to talk to this, because this is a really important part of the publication.
Yeah, it's kind of our emblem in a way. This is something just for, and we don't have a lot of time, so quite quickly. Very early on in the piece, we commissioned Paris, which is a pretty fantastic graphic design agency. They do, for instance, they've done most of the cover artwork for Bjork for many years, and work with a lot of art centers, as well as doing big commercial fashion brands like Calvin Klein and Loewe. And we went to them with the idea of hybrid, and by the time we got to them, COVID was starting to be a thing, and they were really, in Europe, they were really suffering from that. They were really in confinement for a very long time, very early. And we were going through something similar, but in a dissimilar way. So the idea of hybridity was immediately a collaborative conversation. It was things which would happen late at night. We'd send long emails, we'd have conversations, and they developed for us. We'd commissioned them to do some artworks for Design Week, which would be sort of posters around town, that sort of kind of mutated of its own accord into a font, like a customized or custom built font, the hybrid font, which is based on many extrapolations of sort of grids and visual languages. It's extreme, and then a sort of an iconographic family, so like a family of icons which can be accumulated and massed over time to create this sort of sense of a hybrid thing. We were all, when it came in, I don't think any of us were together, but everyone was really excited because it seemed to capture that idea of complexity and contradiction and hybridity and cross-pollination and things that aren't necessarily beautiful or refined or even resolved. But in that, it's the essence of what Design Week was going to be, and it's the essence of the hybrid, the hybrid publication.
Yeah, so we've included some slides from Guy Coulaman's.
Yeah. One of the, as Keinton started off talking about the importance of new material research was something very important to both of us individually, and as we came together we realized we shared that passion, and we've been speaking to Guy Coulaman's at UNSW about it as well. And the idea, the starting point for our conversation with Guy was that Australia has very little in the way of industrial production anymore. That was pretty much bombed in the 80s in favor of the coal industry. But material research and material technologies have moved beyond the factory, and there's so much exciting stuff that's going on in materials research that is also incredibly rich and able to be communicated across long distance. So a big part of what we're doing is we're developing a chapter on new materials, and that's taking a lot of conversations with people around the world. So, some of them are with former Phantasma in Amsterdam, who graduated from the Eindhoven Academy. And this is an abstract image. I've got no idea what it is.
Yeah, so this is just a bit of an overview. I think you have a lot of this text, but just an overview, I guess, of the hybrid commission, what we're asking the designers to do, looking at objects and furniture for the year 2030. And that was, that date was specifically chosen, I think, in the sort of around the time that the bushfires were happening in Australia, and we felt that there was a general sense or feeling that all of these sort of forecasted predictions that we thought would happen in maybe 30 to 50 years were actually happening a lot sooner than that. So we're really interested in this year of 2030 and this project being, I guess, like a speculative design project, but one that is much more sort of in the near future as opposed to 50 or 100 years in the future, given, I guess, the urgency of the situation, and also a lot of the data that's coming in about, you know, us needing to reduce our emissions by 45% by the year 2030, and it just seemed like a really important date to.
There was quite a lot of United Nations climate data for that period, and also we have really good demographic data, and it was very important for us that the top line brief is furniture and objects for future homes, but it was very important that we set that future at an envisageable future, so that we're not in the realm of science fiction. We're looking at extrapolating information and techniques and technologies and ideas we have now to 10 years from now.
Some more work.
We were very intrigued. I was very lucky to be in New York in middle of February for the opening of OMA show at the Guggenheim, but there was also a show at MoMA on the work of Mary Oxman, who's at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it's an extraordinary body of work on sort of organic growing materials from natural things. So it's called material ecology in her terms, and that's kind of become a touchstone for our ideas and our thinking around materials research.
Fantastic.
That's probably it. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions to finish up on. The first one is, where do you start with research in your own projects?
That is a very good question, actually. It's been quite an interesting few months, actually, because our many of the resources that I would normally rely on in terms of access to libraries and books, we've had to review that somewhat. So a lot more of our research, I guess, is happening online now with online resources and databases. And I think the starting point for me, working as a contemporary designer, I really need to be, and I'm interested in being across all of the sort of current global issues that are happening. So I tend to read a lot, so The Economist and New York Times, and some of the science journals, for example. So it's, I guess, places you wouldn't necessarily expect a design curator to start off with, but I'm just very interested in, I guess, where we are globally, like the most pressing sort of global issues. For Common Good, which is an exhibition I curated a couple of years ago, I was looking very closely at data coming out from the UN, for example, in terms of population growth, the statistics on rural to urban migration internationally, and sort of international development initiatives and that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, a whole sort of a broad range of resources. I mean, obviously sort of design theorists as well, but working in the contemporary space, I think it's really important to be across yeah, some of those really pressing sort of global issues that are happening all around us.
Yeah, I mean, as an old jobbing journalist, I mean, I operate on my nose and my network and people conversations that come up, but that's a crude network and knowledge of almost 40 years. I'm thinking if it was young me, and I think what I would advise my young self is go where you feel you're most interested to be. Set up a crap load of Google alerts so that as soon as design comes up every morning, or if you're interested in materials, if you're interested in Neri Oxman, if you're interested in Keinton Butler, every time they're mentioned, you get up in the morning and there's a fabulous email, and then just do a lot of rabbit holes. And you'll very quickly find that you're in a network of information. There is so much information. I would say define kind of where you want to be. That'll take a little time, but once you define it, just mine it as deeply as you can.
They're both great answers. We have one last question before we wrap up, and could either of you maybe talk a little bit more about domesticity? What you mean by domesticity?
Ooh.
That's a
Did we say domesticity? Who said domesticity?
So I guess through this brief, we're really looking at the sort of domestic environment, and I guess potentially the change in dwellings and homes and our homes in the year 2030. And I think you'll probably see in the brief we reference changes in demographics, particularly around Greater Sydney. This idea, as I mentioned before, about increased density of cities and rural to urban migration, which is happening all over the world. So our homes are getting smaller. And we were really hoping that this brief is able to tease out some new ideas about how we might be able to live in our homes in a more sort of harmonious way, and I think that it's not really only the spatial sort of challenges. It's actually the impact of being in a small space often as well. So some of the designers that we're working with are really looking at health and well-being within those small spaces, and this sort of newly introduced idea of isolation as well. So creating homes or domestic environments that people are happy living in and are feeling a good sense of well-being. I mean, that is a huge design challenge, I think, and it's greater than just creating furniture that's multifunctional, or a space that you can dine in and sleep in and work in, although that's important. It's how do you actually live well in a space like that? So yeah, we're getting some really interesting responses around that.
I mean, just on I think probably as a last note is that COVID, as terrible as COVID-19 has been, it's been incredibly interesting to watch, because our brief was being formulated during the bushfires. And then by the time the brief went out, only a little while afterwards, by the time the first submissions came in, we were about to go into kind of enforced isolation. And it's the way it's focused each of the design groups has been quite incredible, whether they're working in Amsterdam or down in Bega. The concept of the home has become so incredibly important, and it's terrible to say. It's been a great focusing device for us.
Yeah, look, I think they're great insights, and as a practicing architect, my other kind of hat, I know that my whole perception of the way I live, the way I design, and the way that I interact in a domestic environment has been profoundly changed by being forced to be isolated, and it makes you think differently about things. So I think there's lots of terrific thoughts and propositions in what we've talked about today. So just wanted to thank you both for making the time to join us and our students today. And I believe Emma's going to jump back in and wrap up things. So I'll say thank you and goodbye, and hand over to Emma to finish off.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Uh-oh.
You're on mute, Emma, I think.
Thanks. I've been pretty
International Sign Language, we can't hear you.
Oh, look, I just wanted to say thanks again to you both, and also to Mark. A fantastic discussion and some great insights and inspiration for the students to really move forward with. We might even keep the conversation going throughout the term if you're interested in popping back in and seeing what comes during the process of design.
Yeah, no, it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting. It's exciting for us.
Absolutely.
It is. It is. So thank you both once again for your time, and we really do look forward to catching up later on in the semester, and it's been a fantastic discussion today. So all the best. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Okay.